I might pop our PowerPoint up so people know they're all in the right place. Okay, and what do you think, Mr. SI? Shall we get started? Okay, I can see you nodding there, so let's get started on our topic for today. So welcome to Talk Together, and our topic this week is behaviour management. Talk Together is a 4-part series. And in our first, and this is our third webinar in the series. In our first 2 webinars, we talked about how to help children who use hearing technology get ready for reading. If you missed those webinars and that's the topic you're interested in, I'm pleased to let you know that the first one of those is available as a recording on the Hear Life Malaysia YouTube channel, so you can catch it there. A little bit of housekeeping about our webinars. You will notice that your microphones have been muted, and this is to help us as presenters just minimize the background noise. But we do like to hear from you, so please put any comments or questions in chat. We've got our colleagues in the Malaysia team monitoring the chat for us, and wherever possible, we're going to try and address your questions during the webinar. If we don't get to them today, at the end, we're going to share our email address. You can contact us directly with comments or questions using that email address. So let us start by introducing ourselves. My name's Rebecca Claridge. I'm a speech language pathologist and certified auditory verbal therapist. And I've been working as a rehabilitation manager for Medell for the last 3.5 years. Donna.
Hi again, everyone. My name is Donna Sporandio, and I've been working for Medell for the last 7 years and have been lucky enough to visit Malaysia sometimes within that time frame. I am a teacher of the deaf and a certified auditory verbal therapist.
Thanks, Donna. So today we're joined by a guest speaker, Pip Burton. Pip is a child and adolescent health nurse, and she has specific qualifications in helping families who are dealing with behaviour problems. Pip has qualifications in the Stepping Stones PPP program, which is a positive parenting program for families who have a child with a disability, and additional qualifications in 1, 2, 3 Magic, which is a 3-step approach to develop calm, effective and happy parenting. So today, Donna's going to talk to you firstly about behaviour problems and children with hearing loss. And then I'm going to talk about building a strong foundation for behaviour management. And then Pip's going to come in and tell us all about 1, 2, 3 Magic and how to become an emotion coach for your child. So over to you, Donna. You're muted, Donna.
Okay, so let's start doing some thinking about behaviour problems. So first of all, I'd like you guys to think about that. What do we mean when we say a behaviour problem? So I'll ask you to give us some thoughts in the chat. Maybe tell us what you think of as a behaviour problem and perhaps some examples that you have to deal with, either as parents or as therapists. Michelle, can I ask you to monitor the chat function for us and tell us what people are saying?
Sure.
think people are a bit shy to share their thoughts. Oh, here we go. Thanks, JC.
Yeah, JC said child cries in the session and starts to hitting people. And Christine, she said patient who does not cooperate in the session. And Dr. Basha, she said when certain behavior are disruptive in learning. Izyan Fahana, negative action. Patient who manipulate others. Child throw tantrum and refuse to engage. Yeah.
These are all sounding like really typical things that we all deal with, aren't they, with behaviour problems? So let's look a little bit more at how we might define these behaviours. So we might think about difficult behaviours. When we say difficult, we might mean a temporary stage as the child's trying out different ways of interacting. An example might be if a child perhaps throws themselves down in the supermarket. So as a child enters their toddlerhood, often they start to do those kind of behaviours, don't they? If those behaviours are well managed, then often that behaviour will move on to a useful communication. But if there is not good management of those behaviours, then sometimes they can really become a pattern. Then we think about challenging behaviours. These are behaviours that really are more likely to require some kind of intervention to help. It was great to hear that somebody mentioned that behaviour can interfere with learning. And when we're thinking about challenging behaviours, we're thinking about behaviours that might do that. They might interfere with a child's learning, with their development, and with their successful interactions with other people. As challenging behaviours, we think of things that might be harmful to the child, to other children, or to the adults around them. And someone mentioned that in the chat also. It's really important that we can stop those behaviours because they're going to put the child at risk of social problems. Children aren't going to want to play with a child who's going to hurt them when they get frustrated. So challenging behaviours we think of as those that are really important to intervene with because they're going to interfere with a child's development if we don't. So why might it be that behaviour problems are more prevalent in children with hearing loss, and especially those children who have additional disabilities? Well, we know that language development can be delayed in children with hearing loss. And language development seems to be very, very important in behaviour management. Imagine if you didn't have the language that you needed. Then think about this child. They're in a situation where perhaps they can't say what they want. Maybe they really, really want to turn with that toy, but they don't have the words to ask for it. And so they might behave in an inappropriate way. Maybe they just don't know what to do. Perhaps an adult has given an instruction in language that the child doesn't understand. Imagine being in that situation. Then you feel like you're doing the wrong thing all the time, frustration can build, and difficult behaviours can increase. If you don't have access to language the same as your peers, then sometimes you might be in a situation where you just get bored. For example, if you're at school and the teacher's reading a story, or maybe you're in a therapy session and the therapist is giving you instructions that you don't understand, then you might just get bored because you don't know what's going on around you. And so in order to stimulate yourself, you're going to perhaps do something that's inappropriate. Now, I'm not saying at this point that children with hearing loss should be allowed to get away with behaviours that are not appropriate. That's not what this means. At this point, we're just thinking about why it might be that these behaviour problems are more prevalent in children with hearing loss. It doesn't mean that those behaviours should be allowed to continue. In fact, it's perhaps even more important that children with hearing loss can learn to fit in. They need to really be able to learn. They need to be able to participate in therapy sessions. They need to be able to learn to make friends. So today we're going to give you lots of useful strategies to help children with hearing loss to learn appropriate behaviours. So why is it that language and communication is so important? Well, we know that language is attached to impulse control. So let's say perhaps that a child is feeling cross with their friend. Maybe their friend has just accidentally knocked over their tower that they've just built with blocks. If a child has good language, we find that more often they're able to control their impulse. Maybe then they can say to their friend, "Oh, stop it. I don't like it when you do that." But a child who doesn't have the language to do that might instead push their friend or even hit them. Planning is important in behaviour management, in a child managing their own behaviours, and that is also dependent on language. For example, if a child wants to go outside and play, they might go to their parent and say, "Please, can I have my shoes?" Or, "I want to go outside." If a child doesn't have that behaviour, it's much more difficult for them to, first of all, think of those things for themselves and also to communicate those to others. So in all these ways, we know that language is important for regulation, for regulating impulse controls, for regulating the planning of play. So we know that language and communication are very, very important in a child's ability to develop appropriate behaviours. We also, it has been suggested that children with hearing loss, when their parents find out about that diagnosis, it can influence their parenting style. We know that some parents of children with hearing loss have higher stress levels. And we do see sometimes more directive language, things like sit down, eat dinner, stop that. So having that diagnosis of deafness can sometimes reduce the type of language that parents use, and they start to use a lot of directions to their children. We also know that for children who might have technology that's not working well enough for them, if they have some access to sound, often that access is in the low frequency range. A child with hearing loss usually has more access to low frequency sounds than to high frequency sounds. And unfortunately, that means that they have more access to angry voices than they do to quiet, pleasant voices. So again, this is another impact of hearing loss onto a child's behaviour. And with these things happening, with the parents' higher stress levels, with more directed language, with a child who sometimes hears that low frequency information more often, a negative cycle of interaction can develop. So one of the things we really want you to think about today is to change your perception. When a child exhibits a certain behaviour, we want you to think of that as a communication. For example, if a therapist gets out a particular book and the child pushes it away, what is it that the child's telling you? What would the child say if they had the words? Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have to read the book, but what it does mean is that the language the child is looking for can become our therapy goal. Things like, I don't like it, I don't want it, no, don't, mine. Maybe if a child's taking a lot of items off other children, these might become our therapy goals. So the behaviour that we see, we want you to think of it as a communication and then think, what is the language goal that we can use to help the child manage this? Now, I spoke earlier about the importance of language development, of communication, of being able to hear that whole range of frequencies. So again, it's very, very important that the child can hear well. If you have any problems, any concerns about children who you see on your therapy caseload, or if you're a parent, if you have a concern about your child's hearing, then we're here to help you. Just be in touch with us and we can help you to make sure that the child has the best technology that's available. Now, we're lucky now that in Malaysia, the new Sonnet 2 processor is available. And the Sonnet 2 processor is going to help us with one of our first and most important goals in behaviour management for children with hearing loss. That is that if their eyes are open, their technology must be on. Children cannot learn the language they need to manage behaviour. They cannot learn how to cope if they're not hearing well. So we need those devices on if the child's awake. Now, the new Sonnet 2 has got improved data logging functions. It gives us lots of information. It gives us information about the sound levels that the child's hearing. It gives information about the listening environments the child is in. It gives information about wearing time. How much is the child actually wearing the device? It also can help us when we look at the programs that are being used. So we know that different maps can be set into a cochlear implant. So the data logging is going to help us with the program usage. And it's also going to help us to see when children are using different accessories. So all of these new features really help us to ensure that the child is in the best listening condition so they have the best chance to learn language and to be able to learn to manage their own behaviour as well. Okay, now I'm going to pass over to Rebecca.
Okay, thanks, Donna, and thanks for that insight about children with hearing loss and behaviour problems. A lot of information there. So in this part of the webinar, we're going to talk about managing behaviour. So managing behaviour is a lot easier when families start with this solid foundation. So a solid relationship being the foundation. So we're going to talk about some strategies that you can share with the families that you're working with on building a stronger parent-child or caregiver-child relationship. So let's start with this first one, spend time together. So it seems like a really obvious activity for families to be doing, spending time together, but actually for some, this can be a real challenge. So the challenge might come from conflicting priorities, so work or household management, or it could be something more personal and relate to emotions associated with having a child with hearing loss who may also have additional complex needs. Or it could be simply that parents or caregivers really don't know what to do when they're spending time with their child. So here it's important to set a really achievable goal for to begin with for families, and that might be as something as simple as 2 or 3 minutes, 2 or 3 times a day. And then you're going to build that up over time as parents and families become more comfortable and confident, building it up to 20 minutes together 4 times a day. And during these times, it's important that we coach families to be responsive to the child's interests. So what that means is, you know, it's easy if the child is interested in the same things as you are. You know, you're playing with the ducks together, quack, 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 quack. But sometimes children with particularly restrictive interests play in a different way that parents can't really engage with. Maybe the child is interested in spinning the duck on its head. And then we're going to coach parents to still follow their child's interests. So we do have some research to show that joining with the child in their interests, even if it's not mainstream, can build that connection, can build the relationship. And it's probably another topic for a whole nother webinar. So I'll leave that there. But we do want to avoid interruptions. Oh, hold on, I'll just take this of course, our mobile phones being the biggest interrupter of our lives. So we're going to coach families to avoid their phones. Just ignore your phone, put it away. Just for that 2 minutes, just for that 3 minutes that you're going to dedicate to spending time with your child. And in that time, we're going to encourage families to show affection and to be on the child's level. So being on the child's level, we can actually think about this in two different ways. Being on the child's level, being learning domains, so language level, cognitive level, so pitching those activities at the same level as the child, or just that little bit ahead of the child to show them the way forward. We can also think of it as being physically on the child's level. Like you can see in this picture here, the mum is right on her child's level. She has brought the child up to her level. Another way, of course, is to get down on the floor with the child. The second way we're going to encourage families to build that solid relationship as the foundation is to provide engaging activities. First on the list here again is that idea of acknowledging the child's interests. So that doesn't mean if the child is interested in Thomas the Tank Engine that the family needs to rush out and buy 15 different Thomas the Tank Engines, although I have seen families do that. Having 15 different Thomas the Tank Engines is probably not in the child's best interests, because what we're after here is an engagement between the child and the adult. And if the child is surrounded by those 15 Thomases, that engagement between adult-child is not going to happen. So a more productive use of that child's interest might be to play with the Thomas, and maybe another toy, a cow, might get in Thomas's way. So to create some kind of guided play sequence that can facilitate an engagement, an engaging activity. So it's a good idea to have a variety of activities in mind. Maybe, you don't have to come up with new ones every time. You can rotate activities around, maybe have some on a weekly rotation. We can include play that uses objects and non-object activity. So what I'd like you to do now in chat, and I'm hoping, Michelle, you can monitor the chat there for me. Could you write in there what you think I mean by non-object activities? What am I talking about here? What would be examples of non-object activity that you could talk to families about? People play. Yeah, Michelle?
Yeah, people play.
I wonder if you could tell me a little bit more about that. I'm not sure I know what that means. Is it pay? Do I say pay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, people play like peekaboo, exactly. So we're not using any toys, we're hide and seek. Great, thanks for that elaboration. Yeah, hide and seek.
Singing.
Yes, fabulous.
Functional play or blowing.
Yeah, just using our body parts, terrific.
Dancing.
Fabulous. Great suggestions. So, we're not always dependent on having loads and loads of expensive toys. Non-object play often creates a much stronger engagement between adult and child.
We got another example, pretending to be.
Pretend play. Yeah.
Yeah.
The participants in the play take on different roles. Lovely examples of non-object activities. We're going to encourage families to think about taking their play outside, or if they normally play outside, bring their play inside. And we're going to be following the child's lead. The third way we're going to encourage families to build that solid relationship is to develop routines. Routines make us all feel safe. you know, as we begin to recognize those familiar sequences that come from a routine that we know, we can understand and predict what is coming next. So for children, that ability to predict is very reassuring. And this feeling helps build that relationship, that solid relationship. It's really important here that we check in with families that they are including all the children in the household in their routines. Sometimes, as Donna mentioned, we see families beginning to make excuses for their child with hearing loss. Oh no, they don't need to help out. Oh no, it'll be easier without her, so on. But this is, again, not in the child's best interests. Participating in routines makes us feel safe, and contributing to a group task makes children feel valued. And completing tasks independently allows children to feel success. So establishing routines is a great thing to be doing. So when families are doing that, we're going to encourage them to identify what parts of the routine will be realistic for their child to complete, and to be consistent in their requests for that, and be ready to praise, lots of praise for every completion of every step of that routine sequence. And if need be, to use visual support if needed, and to establish the routine, and also when giving directions to complete the routine. So in this image here, you can see from our Med-El blog, the Rehab at Home series, where Matthew and his mum, you can watch a little video here, are completing an everyday routine. They're setting the table together. And you can see Matthew's mum is using some visual support to help him get the steps, or remind him of the steps to complete the routine. So the final way that we're going to encourage families to build that strong relationship, it's the most powerful tool that adults have, in fact, in building that relationship with their child. And this is noticing when their child is doing something good. We can actually model this behaviour in our sessions. So it might be as simple as when the child comes in, we might make a comment like, oh, wow, you got up in that chair so quickly. Look at you sitting nice and straight. Or we might make a comment about a behaviour that has been changing. Oh, I love the way you're keeping your hands still. Well done with that. So we're going to encourage families to make specific observations of things, really those positive behaviours that are contributing to the whole good outcome for the child. We're going to encourage families to comment and praise, and use that whole body language and facial expression praise, like you can see in this picture. So this picture is a little boy, Valentin, from Austria, and look at his dad. His dad is like full of praise. His body language and his face is showing how happy he is with his son. You can see Valentin and read about his story on our Med-El Global Instagram handle, which I follow, and I'd encourage you all to, because there's some really nice stories there of Med-El users all around the world. We're going to model and encourage families to use acoustic highlighting, and we're in that tone. So I'm happy with you tone. Donna talked about children who are insufficiently amplified having access to those low frequencies of speech that amplify the angry tones. But when children have access to all of the sounds of speech, we want them to hear all of the beautiful super segmentals that go with praise. So even if they're not understanding the words, they can understand the emotion that is carried in the intonation. Another way families can reinforce good behaviour is with by using rewards. And you can see I've sort of grayed out those words on this slide. Using rewards is commonly used in more structured behaviour modification programs. So for here, we would use them very sparingly. A reward might be something like, I don't know, a sticker, or the use of a game or something. Really, when we're building that solid foundation, we want the reinforcement for good behaviour to be a personal one. So commenting and praise, affection. Okay, so that's all from me about building a solid relationship for the foundation of behaviour management. Now I'd like to hand over to Pip Burton, who's going to talk to us about becoming your child's emotion coach. Pip, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Pip Burton. I'm a paediatric and child health nurse. I've been working with families in both hospital and community settings for about 30 years now. So as you can imagine, I have seen an awful lot of different types of behaviour. As Rebecca mentioned earlier, I have done courses in Triple P Stepping Stones and also Magic 123 emotion coaching. And today I'm going to give a broad overview of the 123 program and the emotion coaching. Thanks, Rebecca. So what exactly is emotion coaching? Some of you might be aware of the original 123 Magic program, which was developed by psychologist Thomas Fallon. The emotion coaching side comes in from another psychologist called Michael Horton. And he's come up with this plan to basically make teaching children and managing their behaviours in a nicer and more calm way. And it also helps to build emotional resourcefulness in children and encouraging that a parent and child relationship. So using some of the following strategies, hopefully we can help make parent easier and improve parent and child relationships. Thanks, Beck. So 2 approaches to parenting. They talk about the outside-in method. So this is really where the parent shapes a child's behaviour using rewards and setting limitations. The rewards can be in the form of praise or a positive reinforcement, or even offering little rewards like a previously picked out toy or something that the child has wanted to work towards. Setting limitations, we're looking more at sanctions that are used to discourage those inappropriate behaviours. An example of this can be like a timeout, or maybe even taking the toy away from the child. When we talk about our inside out method, we're moving more into our emotion coaching. This helps the child learn to self-regulate by helping them identify and track and manage their emotions. Over time, hopefully the children will learn to use feeling words to describe what they're feeling and what they're going through, instead of becoming frustrated and misbehaving. It's important to try and find a balance in between these 2 methods. So key components of emotion coaching. Emotions are difficult, and emotions and difficult behaviour are often linked. Difficult behaviour can start off as just an emotional reaction that gets out of hand and escalates. How often have you seen a child who's reacted very strongly to a minor situation? When children experience behaviour problems, they don't have the capacity to tolerate their emotional reactions. And as parents and caregivers, being able to help them learn to tolerate negative emotions and increase wanted behaviour is a great thing to do. We can teach them how to manage their emotions and therefore their behaviour. Managing emotions can be taught. So principles to keep in mind. So responding reasonably develops over time, and this can be with adults as well. As you can see from this slide, children's brains become more mature and make more connections. More connections in the nerves in the brain are a direct result. Oh, I've lost our PowerPoint there, Rebecca. Thank you. Of the child learning through experience. So these can be good experiences, bad experience, frustrating experiences. So it's important for children to learn how to practice managing these emotions with our guidance, protecting children from these. Oh,
Pip, I just wanted to check that you can still see the slide.
yeah, no, it's just popped back up, Rebecca.
Okay, my apologies for that.
That's okay. So it's important for children to practice managing the emotions, and as I said, protecting them from these different emotions is not always helpful. Number 2, children can't always regulate their behaviour when they're very emotional, and they can't take a lot of spoken information in, so they can get overwhelmed by too much talk and too much emotion. Number 3, when we're talking about sorting behaviours, it's a pretty important thing to do. When we talk about that, we're deciding how we're going to respond to the child's behaviour. If it's something that we're going to ignore or maybe divert, or if we're going to teach them some self-control through emotion coaching. And last but not least, it's very important to remember positive reinforcements of good behaviour. We're talking a lot about how we're handling challenging behaviours, but it's always very important to acknowledge the use of praise and positive reinforcement to encourage desirable behaviours. So I mentioned sorting behaviour. How do we sort behaviour? And why do we need to? So sorting behaviour helps in when we decide, is this a serious problem and does it need an immediate action? So minor but annoying behaviour, such as your child making a silly noise or tapping a pen, or sort of, calling out mum, mum, mum. It's annoying, but it's not really causing a lot of problems. Then we talk about our start behaviour, and that's when we want to encourage a child to do something, sort of like getting dressed or maybe start a chore. And then we move on to the stop behaviour. And this is, of course, the behaviour that we really want to stop, and we want to stop it fairly quickly. So we like to call it the big rocks. So helping to identify those big rocks, like hurting other children or wrecking things. It's important to start immediate action when that behaviour happens. Putting the time into working out those big rocks and working on them, and letting those minor but annoying behaviours, just ignore them. Benefits to using sorting behaviour. We've talked a little bit about, don't pay attention to behaviours that aren't serious, but we learn to pay more attention to the behaviours that we respond to. And it also means that we can respond consistently and be a little bit more flexible in our response, when to act and when not to act. So the 3 choices to managing difficult behaviour. We try and match the best response to the particular behaviour. As before we mentioned, ignoring it or diverting attention for annoying but minor behaviours. I'll go into a little bit further detail with this in the further slides. Emotion coaching to teach self-control for behaviours that haven't really escalated. And then, of course, managing the behaviours, rewards and praise for good behaviour, and then your counting system 1, 2, 3, and signalling for stopping those behaviours that you want to stop. It's important to remember that children don't always understand the world the same way that adults do. And there is generally a lag between the child figuring out what they want and being able to express it. And this is particularly so in children with hearing and language problems. So a little bit more about ignoring or diverting attention. So hopefully the majority of the time, this is all you'll need to do. If the behaviour is just annoying and not causing any harm, then just ignore it. Maybe before it escalates a little bit, you can try and divert that child's behaviour. As you can see in the photo on the slide, there's a mother there, she's saying, oh, look over there. It's a great way to divert. Another way that is a good way for diverting is to have something that the child really likes to play with, maybe a toy or a book, and just bring their attention back to that rather than a situation that is starting to cause some challenging behaviour. And I believe Rebecca has a video, a little video about ignoring some annoying behaviour.
Yes, I do, except Donna's going to share it, Pip, because her internet is a little bit better. So away you go, Donna.
Di mana disimpannya? Oh, kelompokan di mana? Ya, di mana cari? Di mana ya? Topi. Belakangnya berarti? Iya, yang mana ya? Mana ya? Ini sayang.
Disebutkan ya Bu, misalnya cabe, gitu lagi ya Bu.
Cabe, batu, baso, boneka, kursi, jadi yang mana nih? Topi. Bener loh Nadira, oh iya di sini ya, sama tuh, sama-sama kursi. Ada dong.
Nadira yang ambil dari kantong, Nadira yang...
Okay. Thanks, Donna. So that little piece of video came from a session in Indonesia. You probably picked that up. It was a telepractice session. The target of the activity was actually phonological awareness, which was the topic of our previous webinar. And I saw that little piece of video and I thought, oh, the mum's done a really great job there diverting the child from this little bit of behaviour. So you could see the child was just about to bail out on the activity and the mum just went, oh no, that's simply not happening, popped her up, and she continued on with the activity and did a little bit of a diversion using her voice. So she added some extra acoustic highlighting to simply divert the child's attention away from that behaviour. All right, let me go back and find our PowerPoint for you, Pip. Okay, and let's move on to the next slide.
So I'm just going to talk a little bit more about the emotion coaching side of things. And we use this for what we like to call the small rocks, or behaviour that hasn't really escalated and needing immediate action. Emotional control is an important part of developing maturity. And for the most part, adults' brains are more fully connected and able to identify emotions easier than a child. So helping the child identify that emotion is one step in the process of teaching the child to respond appropriately to that emotion. Tuning into the child's emotion can also help them begin to calm themselves. Children's capacity to respond to reason increases as they mature and as their brains become more organised with each passing year. So coming into how to emotion coach. So it's important to listen with empathy. There's 3 steps here. So listening with empathy just means connecting with the child with the intention to support them. 2, identifying and connecting. So calmly describing your child's feeling and the cause for that feeling. Acknowledging their emotions helps to build 2 types of connections in the child's brain. Firstly, it helps to build the child's connection to the parent, and also it helps those neural connections in the child's brain, making it possible for the child to respond to others with compassion. And then we're looking at our third step to emotion coaching, which is setting limits while helping to find a solution. And I'll discuss that a little bit more in the further slides. So listening with empathy. So to avoid too many questions, parents are encouraged to use STEM statements. STEM statements help avoid questions by suggesting ways to start a conversation when your child is feeling challenged. It's also a good tool to avoid yourself getting emotional at that time. And it's also good practice to try and use these and practice these STEM statements while you're not in a challenging situation. As you can see from the side, the first one, so I think you're looking really angry. You seem surprised. I'm guessing that you are feeling disappointed. So you can just change out that word in the bracket. I'm guessing that you're feeling sad. It seems like you are annoyed, or it seems like you're angry. So using these STEM statements stops that whole questioning from the child and from the parent as well. And it makes it a less emotionally charged situation. So identifying and connecting, making a connection by acknowledging the reason for the emotion that the child is feeling. For example, here we've got, you want the cell phone, but you can't have it. You feel angry. Your toy is missing. You feel sad. You're frustrated because you can't find the last piece. I am too. Helping the child articulate their feelings can help diffuse the situation, and it lets them know that you're listening and you can understand what they're going through. Setting limits to help find a solution. When working with children with language delays, it's important again to use simplified language and support understanding with gestures. For example, setting a limit where we like to give reminders of our rules. So you feel angry, but it's not okay to snatch. Make suggestions of all alternative. How about instead you ask for a turn instead of snatching that? Or even use choices. You can ask for a turn, or maybe you can find a new toy to play with. Rebecca, perhaps you could give some examples of how that would work for a child with a hearing loss.
Sure. So it all goes down to knowing what your child's language level is all about, or the children that you're working with. So we would, particularly for children new to listening, this can work if you support the language with gesture. So even for a child very new to listening, we might say something like, no, you can't have the truck, no grabbing, no. But you can have the digger. Yes, you can have the digger. So something very simple like that, combining gesture, combining support with the suprasegmentals of your voice conveying the emotion. All right, let me pop the PowerPoint back up for you, Pip.
Thanks for that, Rebecca. Next one along, thanks, Beck. Lovely. So we've talked about approaches to parenting, sorting behaviours, ignoring and diverting, and also some emotion coaching. So what do we do when we hit the big rocks? Well, this is where the counting comes in. Counting as a signalling system doesn't stress a child's mind or its ability to keep control. We use this when the child is having a lot of issues with their behaviour and they need to be addressed straight away. It gives a child a limit and helps them to maybe stop themselves and pause and choose a better option. Using counting is like a traffic light. So it stops the emotion attached to the situation and sets a limit. And after a while, hopefully you'll be using that counting less and less. So counting and signalling in action. So when you're looking, when you're talking to a child who has a reasonable understanding of spoken language, it's pretty important to set up a time to explain the system. For a child new to listening, at the beginning of their developing their language skills, this step quite often happens at the time of the behaviour. So when we're talking about starting up our counting, we need to deliver the signal calmly and firmly. We need to give the child time to respond. There's no point going 1, 2, 3 and then have that move straight into a consequence. They need to have a little think about what they're doing. You also need to explain that when you get to that 3, there will be a consequence, and that's usually maybe a timeout, or as we spoke before, it can be removing the toy or taking away a game for a day. We have included a little poster that has got some that you can display maybe on your like kitchen, in your kitchen or on your fridge, where everyone can see it. It's important that everybody is on the same page when you're talking about behaviour management. And this just gives you some guidelines that you can work out and how to maybe write down the examples of the language that your child will be able to understand. For example, when you're talking about when the child will get counted. So Jack might be counted for speaking rudely or hurting somebody. So when the counting doesn't work, what do? We move into timeout. So what is timeout? It's really just where an adult quietly takes a child away from an overstimulating environment. It can be done in 2 ways. For a young child around the 18 months, really it should just be sitting quietly beside you, maybe sitting on a chair or a little cushion. And it's important not to engage the child at this time. Just let them sit there quietly and think about their behaviour. Another way of timeout for an older child is actually removing them from the area and away from the other children and the family. And when you're thinking about a timeout area, it's really important to make sure that it's not an area that the child will enjoy being. You know, if it's full of books and toys, it's really going to be seen more as a reward than somewhere where they need to be thinking about their behaviour. A general rule of thumb for timeout is a minute for every year of their age, up to about 5 minutes. I think Rebecca is going to give an example of how this would work for a beginner learner. Sounds off, Rebecca.
There we go. I guess same idea. We have to consider the child's language level. So a child new to listening, one of the most common observations that families might say would be, oh no, he can't understand this. He can't understand counting. I can't use this process. But actually, we're going to teach the child about counting. So sure, the first time you do this, the child is not going to understand. And just like anything else, you're going to teach them. So a child new to listening, supporting this with lots of gesture. So no biting, no. That's one. You need to stop biting, stop. That's 2. Showing a waiting face. Okay, that's 3. Now, and maybe a little prop, something like a little cloth, you could pop down beside the adult, and then we're going to place the child on the cloth. That's their timeout or their quiet time spot, and not engage with the child. If the child gets up and moves from the spot, quietly bring them back, put them on the spot, and avoiding eye contact and avoiding engaging with any kind of conversation. So that's how it would work for a young child new to listening. Pip.
Thanks for that, Rebecca. So once you've had a little bit of practice with emotion coaching and with the counting and signaling system, sometimes you can combine the both of these. And this just gives the child a little bit more time to understand their emotions and modify their behaviour, and while you're putting in the counting steps. For example, it might look like you feel hungry, but it's not okay to snatch. That's 1. You're not stopping that behaviour. That's 2. This is your last chance. That's 3. And so if that behaviour still continues, then it's time to move into timeout. So common mistakes. It's very difficult not to get affected when your child is misbehaving. It's important to keep cool, calm and collected and follow a plan. The use of STEM statements can help with this, and also the plan that we've included in the resources. Another common mistake is using too much language. So the child can be overwhelmed by too much talk and too much emotion. Their ability to process information is limited. So work out a script and stick to it. Make sure everyone else that is a caregiver is sticking to that program as well. So just moving on to a few little extra considerations that I have noticed in behaviour management and the way children behave. It's important to remember that a child who has not had enough sleep is not going to be on their best behaviour, and it's more likely that they're going to resist changing that undesirable behaviour. So I've just included a little table here from the Sleep Foundation, which just mentions the average hours needed for different ages to sleep. Quite often people don't realise that a 3 to 5 year old still needs a good 10 to 13 hours sleep. So it's a good little reference to have. Another thing to consider when you're with behaviour is encouraging a healthy, balanced diet. Multiple studies have shown that poor food choices can lead to poor behaviour. In particular, there's been increasing evidence to link preservatives and colours added that can affect a child's behaviour. On the slide here, I've just got a little reference from the Australian government, but I'm sure that your local governments would have something similar if you wanted to look at it. So, in summation, behaviour takes time. Changing behaviour takes time. We can approach it from the outside in and manage a child's behaviour, or we can use an inside out approach, helping them to learn self-control. You need to decide on a plan, be consistent, be persistent, and be tolerant. And remember, it's sometimes just as important to let those little things go and think about the big picture, which is your relationship to your child. Thank you for listening to me today. I hope you have learned a little bit about 1, 2, 3 emotion coaching, and I believe Rebecca is going to go through the free resource that you can use to map out and manage some behaviour plans.
Thanks, Pip. That was really informative about 1, 2, 3 Magic. I know it's a really popular program here in Australia for professionals to learn about, to share with parents, and also parents can attend the same course. So it's really great to get some insight into that. I'd like to share the resource that we've got for you. So this will, you'll receive this as a 2-page PDF. So our recommendation is that you print it so that you've got it on one page, so front and back. And it's a summary really of everything we've talked about today. So you'll see down the bottom here that we've got, I wonder if I can do this. We've got Donna's reference to that first therapy goal, which is eyes open, ears on, or technology on. Then up here, we've got those 4 core avenues to building that solid foundation, the solid relationship that builds the foundation for behaviour management. And then we've got the way of sorting behaviours, minor but annoying. Is it a small rock, something that we can emotion coach, or is it a big rock? So that first step, sort the behaviour, to help us think about the next step, which is what do we do about this behaviour? So if you've printed it on both sides, on the flip side here is your opportunity to create a resource specific for an individual child. So for professionals, you might like to use this to guide conversations with families so that they can generate their own responses to sorting a behaviour and what they are going to do about it. So here you would write the child's name, and then what are examples of the minor but annoying behaviours? Okay, so he tugs on my skirt when we're at the shops. It's a minor but annoying behaviour. What am I going to do about it? Or what is everybody involved with this child going to do about it? Well, we're going to ignore it, or we're going to divert attention by pointing to something or using our voice in an interesting way. You're going to write examples of what are the small rocks? What are the issues for this particular child that you're going to encourage everybody involved to recognise when this is a teaching moment, to teach the child about their emotions and what is a reasonable way of reacting to it. And then down here, you're going to identify for this particular child, what are the big rocks? What are those behaviours that we're going to target to stop? And how are we going to go about doing that? Everyone is going to agree and be consistent on their management of those big rocks. So we do have a couple of questions in chat. Donna, do you want to talk about those? What's happening in chat?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Rebecca. So somebody asked about the how much training parents get in different countries on these kinds of things. So they specifically asked about the UK. I don't think there's any country in the world where parents all get training on these kinds of behaviour management techniques, not that I know of, but there are some countries where these types of techniques are available to learn from someone like Pip. Then there was a question about screen time. And this is something that we come across a lot, isn't it? People talk about this a lot. How to manage their child's behaviour on reducing screen time. So I'll give you a moment to have a think about that, Pip, if you would. We know that for children with hearing loss, often they are even more attracted to screens than other children. They really enjoy the visual input from a screen and they can have lots of fun. You can do lots of things with a screen without actually needing language. And so it can be a very attractive and fun thing for a child to do. So Pip, I wonder if you have anything to share with us about how we manage screen time for children.
Sure, it is a big area in our modern day environment, and it is a question that's asked a lot. And I guess having a time limitation on when they're going to use their screen time, also being aware of what they're looking at on their screen time. And then there's also other ways, and we're talking about diversion. So making sure they get plenty of exercises, doing outside sort of education, and having other things like books and other things that they can use instead of that screen time. Because quite often they just get onto that screen time because they're bored.
Actually, I've got a question, Pip, that related to the previous question about what kind of training do parents have in other countries. How do families that you see access parenting help? Like, what is the usual process?
So there's several different processes. in the cases where there is a lot of family dysfunction, it can actually be court ordered. So some families need to attend these sessions to improve their family life, and that's a pretty important thing to get done. In other situations where I work, we do offer these programs. We offer the Stepping Stones program plus the Magic 1, 2, 3, and we can do them as a group sort of thing or as an individual. Quite often when you're working with young children, it's hard for the parent to get time by themselves to concentrate. So being able to go into their home sometimes is a great opportunity.
Thanks. What else is happening in chat, Donna?
Also, people have mentioned how much they love this resource. They like the graphics and that feel that they're going to use it a lot. So that's great to hear. There was a comment that it can be difficult sometimes with the minor but annoying behaviours when you are ignoring them in a therapy session. So someone made the comment that a resource such as this will really help to describe why that's happening and when that should be happening. So that's really great to hear. There was one question, Pip, about the counting method. So the question was from somebody who has used the method and found it really helpful. So I think it was with their niece or somebody like that. So they'd use this counting method, giving the child time, giving them the understanding of what was going to happen, and they found it very helpful. But after they'd been doing it for a while, the child started to count to the parents. So the child kind of flipped it around and started to, in a negative and annoying way, saying to their parents, well, you have to whatever, and I'm going to count 1, 2, 3. What do you think someone might be able to do in that situation?
I guess that's not an uncommon sort of situation. And when we're talking about teaching behaviour management and teaching your child how to control their emotions, it's really a lot about setting an example. So if the child is using that 1, 2, 3, you're probably doing something that you probably shouldn't be doing. It is annoying, and perhaps you can say, look, I realise my behaviour wasn't what it should be, and it's great that you pointed that out, but I am the parent here.
It's interesting too, Pip, that you mentioned that parents need to model what they, the behaviour that they expect in the children. So somebody else in chat was talking about screen activities and mentioned that sometimes actually in those cases you do see that the whole family is overusing screens. So that while we might say this child is using the screen too much, we might see that the parents are on their phones all the time, that the television's going all the time. And so one of the most powerful things that needs to happen is that families need to model in their own behaviour what they want to see in children. Do you have any comment about that?
I think that's exactly right. And I also run a program here that involves singing and rhymes to help children, learn to communicate. And we have a strict rule that there's no phones there's no toys, there's no nothing. It's just all about communicating with the child and, setting a good example for them.
Another thing that I noticed in what you described was the idea that that you are the parent. And I've found sometimes that with families with children with hearing loss, it almost becomes as if the child with hearing loss is in charge of the family. I don't know if anybody else has seen that happen. Maybe let us know on chat if you've seen that. But I think that the really nice thing about this program and using the resource that you've created is that it helps parents to understand that they are the parent, that they're going to have a plan and they're going to be in charge of that plan in a calm way. So yes, a couple of people have said yes, they've seen that a lot, that the children become almost in charge of the family. And JC's mentioned that in their family, they went off screens cold turkey. Oh, so no TV, no YouTube, and no phones, and gadgets were reserved for online classes and work purposes. It turned out well, and having plenty of books and games is the key. So that's a big step to say, no, we're not having it at all. But I think in there again, you mentioned that it was the family. So you all did it together rather than being to the child, no, this is, you're not to go on your phone, when actually parents are on the phone themselves. So that's a really interesting one. Okay, if there's no more questions in chat, I think we might leave it there for the day. Rebecca?
We can, or we could just try a little activity, try that sorting idea. If people have got a few minutes, we could do a real life sorting, well, not real life, but a scenario sort. Let's just try it and see. All right. Let's try this. All right. Come on, you can do it. Or maybe we won't. Sorry, I'm trying something new with my screens today, and clearly it's more challenging than I thought. Let's have another go. All right, I think you can see that, yes?
Yes.
Okay, let's have a look at this. So we're going to use this as our guide, and remember your first step is about sorting the behaviour. So, and matching that best response with a particular behaviour. So let's look at this step and sort. Here we have a child who is tugging on the mum's arm to get attention. Type in chat for me. How are you going to sort this? Is it going to be minor but annoying, a small rock, or a big rock? Go. Yes, we've got somebody saying a small rock. And now this is the thing, different people will perceive this differently. The majority are saying it's a minor but annoying behaviour. So after you've sorted that behaviour, the next step is describe your approach. So thinking about that poster, you're going to choose your approach. Are you going to ignore it, divert attention? Are you going to use this as an opportunity to coach, teach emotions, or manage the behaviour? So what do you do and what do you say? We've got divert attention. People are diverting attention, great. Maybe using your voice, using that acoustic highlight to call the child's attention in another direction. Mummy can say, look at that. Yeah, great. And we saw that in the little video from Indonesia. The mum used acoustic highlighting to just pull the child's attention away from that moment where she was going to behave in an undesirable way. Hold the child's hand while talking about something else. Exactly. Talk about Thomas the Tank Engine or something else that you know will capture the child's attention. Terrific. Let's try another one. Okay, here is the behaviour. The child has removed the audio processor, maybe hasn't thrown it yet, is just about to wind up to throw it. Is this minor but annoying, a small rock, or a big rock? Type in chat. All right, we've got a bit of disagreement about a big rock and a small rock. Can be small, can be big. Well, if the child is going to throw that, I'm going to say this is a big rock. What do you think, Donna?
Yep, I agree. I think there's a difference maybe between just taking it off. If they're going to take it off and throw it, that's an expensive piece of kit and it might be going to break. So in my mind, it's a big rock. And also we know the importance about keeping technology on. So in my mind, it's a big rock.
Yeah, let's go big rock. So it's a big rock. Describe your approach. Which one of these are you going to choose? Ignore? Are you going to emotion coach? Or are you going to manage the behavior with counting? What do you do and what do you say? Go. We've got manage behavior. Great. Oh, I'm glad, Michelle, you thought of that suggestion Pip gave you of combining emotion coaching and managing behavior. Terrific. Great. So how does that sound?
I think that's what people might have been thinking when they were thinking of a small rock, that it is an opportunity to coach and for the child to learn at the same time.
Yeah, great. Stop the child from throwing first. So we're going to gently restrain the child because we don't want that device thrown. We're not going to be standing there counting and watching the child throw that. You're right, Atira, that's entirely correct. Stop the child from throwing first. So we will stop, we will count. No. 1. Maybe we'll even encourage the child to put it back on. And after he can calm down, we can do that emotion coaching. Terrific. You're going really great at these. So let's try one more scenario. So here is the scenario. The child has removed his audio processor and handed it to you. Sort the behavior. What do you think? Small rock, small rock. Yes, I think so. Mind you, the child could be handing it to you because the battery is flat and they want a new battery, in which case this is a moment for praise, managing behavior, but in a positive way, reinforcing that positive behavior. But if the child's just gone, oh no, I don't want it, here, you have it. This is a small rock and we're going to use this moment what are you going to do for this small rock? You are going to in chat, how are you going to approach this? You're going to emotion coach. So finding out the reason for the removal is important. Maybe we can even see that from the child. We can understand their affect. We're going to use the moment to emotion coach. So adding some information about why it's not okay to remove, and we're going to put it back on because that's the right thing. And I'll be happy with you. Yes, yes. Thanks, Dr. Basha, for pointing that out. The processor needs to be on to do the emotion coaching. You are completely right. So get that processor back on and then be the emotion coach. Terrific observation. Great. All right. Well done, everyone, for participating in our first activities on behaviour management using 1, 2, 3 magic approach. That's great. Michelle's just added something about, can you read that one, Donna? I've just lost it for a moment. Oh.
Sorry.
Oh, I have a patient who likes to take his processor off when he comes away from school. Maybe I can try to emotion coach as well. Yeah, that's great. And Michelle, it's good that you're thinking of it, but there's somebody who is better placed to be that child's emotion coach. So who do you suppose that is? Yeah, it's going to be the parent. Certainly talking with the parent about that is great. So now you've got a resource that you can use to spring into that fairly difficult conversation. If this is a well-established pattern, taking the processor off as he leaves school, then that's something that you can work with. Goodbye to Dr. Basha too. Okay, and that probably brings us to the end of today. There's been a lot of information there, and we'll be getting the resource out to you in the next couple of days. Thanks, Pip, so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you and hearing that information about 1, 2, 3 magic.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, bye all.
Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.